Today I'm going to talk about a little bit about Humana and the company and what drives me to work for them and what inspires me. Also, as I talk through it, I'm going to be touching on how we've connected with our business segments, not only from the top down, but also the bottom up, so we can have those grassroots innovation ideas and that carrying on. But most importantly, I'm going to share a little bit about me and my journey into the automation space. Here's all the stats about the company, things that I said yesterday on stage, but most importantly, what inspires me about Humana is our culture and what drives that innovation, and primarily two main things. It's rethinking routine as well as thriving together as we look through it. We have 95,000 people in the company, and it's a very diverse backgrounds from clinicians to call advocates to associates working at our dispensing facilities for our pharmacy. So we all come together and talk through what are our common issues or problems that we have as we look at the landscape across our healthcare continuum as we move through that. So a little bit about me. Over the last 2 decades, I've touched patient care from all different angles, from technology to being the pharmacy technician behind the pharmacy counter at a local retailer, or even within our Humana business. Goes back to thriving together and rethinking routine. At Humana, we often embed our clinicians and people that are skilled in other areas besides process improvement and technology innovation to help drive that mission and help drive that strategy. Throughout my career, I've been on the front line and also have a lot of friends and family that interact with patients. And from nurse practitioners to nurses, just about everywhere, right? I think we all can relate to having somebody that touches patient care in some way, or we've done them ourselves. The key thing that I found is that when I talk to my friends, and a coworker, we'll use Jenica as an example. When we would go off and talk to different clinicians and nurses in the field, and she's a nurse, I would often ask, why do you continue to work 15, 16 hours a day? What are you doing? Like, is it the systems? Is it the process? And, the process improvement part of me is always diving deeper to get those answers. And what I found out was, they're like, Joe, I actually work with the patient 6 hours a day, and then I spend the remainder of the time documenting or recording that interaction in multiple systems. And what I found was, that was a common theme as we looked across the healthcare continuum and the other clinicians as we move. They're not improving, or they're not, sorry, there's some background noise in the back. But they're not interacting with the patient to improve that patient care, but they're rather documenting in 4 different systems on what happened, right? Copying and pasting work, structuring their notes, and moving through that. That was a continuous piece. I also asked questions and feedback to them, like, so why do you do that? Why do you go home at night, beat your head on the table because of this redundant process and do this? And they look at me, or Jenica looked at me and said, Joe, if I wasn't there to advocate for the patient, then who would? So that really touched me personally of the stuff that we do, the processes that we change and innovate will make a difference if we give them the opportunity to help us figure out where to get started. This is a key phrase on the slide that we often say as we're going through this. The member experience is driven by the quality of the associate experience. That example that I just gave with that, how the clinician and how the call advocates are working and utilizing the system, that frustration will carry over into how they operate within the business, within that frustration or with that keeping in mind. So that's why it's going to be our focus as we go through the presentation today. Second. It's my cheat sheet notes, so I don't get strayed. Sorry, the door. As we get started, we start deconstructing our clinical processes. So this started out by us mainly looking at how do we bring automation to the forefront. It's called Art of the Possible is what we named the sessions. And in those sessions, we stood up and started talking about what automation is, what it isn't, and how does it apply to their daily lives, whether it was healthcare or the financial, with the finance and our shared services. A lot of the nurses have dealt with the Pyxis machine, for example, coming out into hospitals and not going into medicine closets in there to dispense medications. At first, they're weary about that change, and they don't understand. They just reminisce about that. Same thing with ATM machines as an example, right? When the ATM machine first came out, but the bank teller's like, oh, that's going to replace my job. But in reality, it transformed their job into something else and doing more complex tasks, not just withdrawing and depositing money into accounts. So we start bringing those real-life problems in our history back to the forefront so everybody can relate to that. And then look at the Pyxis machine then, I was worried about it. But now I see how it improved our quality of the experience. Quality is also the foundational place where we started. So through those Art of the Possible sessions, we brought a whole room full of different SMEs or subject matter experts, leaders, basically a cross-section of an organization. And in that process, once we outlined what automation was, then we started understanding where were we spending our time. So we would have whiteboard sessions, we would talk through this for 2 days. And what we found out through that process is we were already documenting our processes because we're a highly regulated organization and company through CMS, et cetera. We document every step that happens in our back office and front office for compliance reasons. And then we have teams of people going out and checking those steps with audits, and they record them usually on a form, in Excel, et cetera. So as we were talking as a combined group, why didn't we build a taxonomy around that and consolidate that into 4 major categories? So taking the things that were already documented, that we already have scoring on, whether it was completed or not, the questions, grouping them in 4 categories. Clinical data management, good documentation practice, more of the interaction, whether it's telephonic or when they're actually interacting and building that rapport with the patient. What we found was 80% of that time, just as we suspected, they were documenting the process or interacting with the systems, not interacting and building that relationship with the patient. That seemed a little high. So then we continued to scale and look across the organization. The same theme carried whether we were in home care, telephonic care, pharmacy, you name it. Percentages varied slightly, but nonetheless, the same theme carried over. The most impactful thing that this did was as we were going out and doing side-by-sides and interacting, everybody said the same thing. I don't have time for this, I can't handle the change, and you don't give me the tools that I need. They also said, Joe, you just don't understand, right? Because I'm not the nurse, I'm not the doctor or the pharmacist in the room. But I do have that passion, and I did want to figure it out. So this allowed us to quantify what they were telling us on the ground and build that use case to sponsor our automation program and start influencing that funding from the top down. Because now we can quantify the interaction at an aggregate level that speaks for what they were experiencing. So then we set out the established goals. So our goal, not how much money we save, but how do we just shift these percentages a little bit? So instead of documenting a majority of the time, let's shift it over and let's talk about how we expand our care delivery and that interaction by making that documentation process simpler. Pretty easy concept, right? Like as we talk through it. But keep in mind, this quantified their problem, and we were able to establish not just administration costs to accomplish this, but also gave us the drivers that we needed for the funding to start off our automation program. And the associates that helped us do this, there was a smile on their faces in the room when they got to present that to their leaders to say, I told you so, as we were going through. So what happens next? So now we have robust architectures, we have barriers to change, we have everything that we've all talked about and repeated consistently over the last couple days, and we'll probably often hear it in our everyday lives. But now as a COE, how do we go broad outside of business segments and not just in our own little spot? How do we establish the right care at the right time in the right place? And how do we get the right champions around us to help influence that? So first step, we need to build a mission statement around the data that we already quantified. So how do we set this up for Humana? What does that mean for us as we look forward? So now we have the data that supports the mission, and now we have the mission statement. Now we can start assembling teams. How do we differentiate our products and services that we offer? Hint, this will help when we start prioritizing work in a little bit. How do we enhance our customer and associate experiences? Like we said, these things are closely linked together. And how do we reduce complexity, improve quality, productivity, and efficiencies, and position Humana as a technology and industry leader, right? So this is where we start setting up the frameworks to transform, innovate, and scale. First off, establishing a community of practice. The skills that we're teaching the associates in these Are the Possible sessions and the leaders were the most important part. These are tools that we're giving them to go off and use, not just today in this session or next week, but this is going to inspire how they lead and govern going forward for that change. Because automation is now a new tool set that they're aware of and they can use. Allie, you heard me talk about Allie yesterday briefly. You'll get to meet Allie at the end. But this was also very important because when I presented this, it was always the same reaction in the Other Possible sections. Joe, great. What can I name my bot? And you're crazy. This can never happen. I miss those sessions because they were really, really great. We'll start doing them again or taking part in them. But Allie was away, and my team took a long time to figure this out. One, branding something inside of a large corporation is not easy things, even though it's an internally branded thing. It takes time, and there's debate on how you spell names and what the name should be and all that. So if you're planning on doing it, take your time, talk through it, and go through. But basically, we sat around a filing cabinet as a team of like 6 at that point, and we said, like, what do we want to name our bot? We need to get rid of this Megatron, Bumblebee, like all kinds of stuff. So we wanted to pick a name that had a humanistic characteristic, because we realized that we could name individual bots that we deploy, which would later be hundreds, or at that point we were hoping would be hundreds if we were successful. Or do we build a brand around that automation that would apply to that unique process that we're doing? But also, Allie will grow with the associates. So as we reinvent the associates' jobs, Allie will also learn new skills and get upskilled. So as we went from straight basic process, pure RPA, automation, and we start laying in more complexity from OCR and LP, name the thing, right? Allie would also, as the technology advances and consolidates, would grow. The most unique thing was, I'll talk about that and how we did that, but the most unique thing was people started talking about, first of all, I didn't know how it would take off. Were they going to make fun of it? What was going to happen? Was it going to be, if it was good, it was great. If not, whatever. But what we found was people started saying, you know what? I trust this technology now. Can Allie help me with this? So what it did was make things easier for their transitions or their reinvention of their jobs. So like, you know what, I know I copy and paste this in 4 systems. Can Allie do that for me and I just validate his work as we move? So we started seeing that take off more and more. They started referring it as a friend or a colleague rather than this technology that might work, right? Which was always the fear. That changed the persona on how they reference and saw how it could inspire them. We were very deliberate on how we marketed this across. Because remember, we have 5 different business segments across small teams and departments up to very large ones in the tens of thousands. So how do you do that? We create artifacts, FAQs that we posted, internal articles in our intranet that we would release introducing the technology as well as the brand to the associates. But most importantly, a message wheel. A simple circle that talks about who, what, where, when, and why that we would hand out to the leaders. So as they're going to their town halls, team meetings, whatever, they're using the same words and vocabulary on how to describe this technology. So now we have consistency of language as we're describing what this is and who Allie is and what it can do and where it's happening at. Out of all my advice that you hear today, if you're planning on scaling a program, focus your time on the brand that you're putting behind it. Let your team help decide it and get feedback from the associates, the clinicians, the advocates, whoever it may be in your organization on how they want to contribute to that brand with it. Federated governance with fusion teams. Sorry. So this one's funny to me because I was on the business side at the beginning of my career trying to implement this, and I was like, IT, just go ahead and do it. It's fine. I got funding from the business. I have a dream. We have a vision. It's going to be all right. Don't worry about it. My IT partner at the time was like, Joe, we do have to manage risk on the system. Just because it's a dream doesn't mean it can't be untethered. I'm like, I understand. But that's when we start building that relationship. So what is the right level of governance that we put on citizen developers and then into this program? And it's really about what is the healthy balance. We still follow, with our citizen developer program, we still follow all the SDLCs, the stage gates, all those things, code quality checks, and all those items. The important part was, it wasn't just turn your essay in and hope I get an A on it. It was that IT team was embedded in our Fusion team. So they were a part of that small team of 4 or 5 people that was working closely with those SMEs. So it wasn't like, hopefully I get it back on Tuesday. It was like, we have a plan together and we're executing this. And I need your help so I code this correctly and I can release it on time, you know? So it wasn't a big queue, so small teams. Proactive opportunity, discovery, portfolio, and prioritization. Hands down, the biggest piece is the discovery. So these are the possible sessions is where we started building our backlogs with the teams. And those sessions would carry over for the following weeks and months internally inside that business unit. We didn't walk out of that room until we had the top 3 to 5 projects that we wanted to execute in the next 6 to 8 weeks. The velocity was depending on the team and how fast they wanted to move, of course. But that was the plan, because as soon as we left that room, this was no longer the most important thing that we had to solve for. But we had the team and the resources and the funding to support that. So also important piece, prioritize your work inside those are the possible sessions before the team disperses and starts operating independently or self-sustaining. This one's fun. Who owns digital transformation as we look at it? So it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about like me on the business side and now I'm on the IT side. So now I'm kind of playing both pieces. But every time I would ask this question, we would always go back to who owns digital transformation? And people would be like, well, IT owns that. The analytics team owns that. Go talk to the process engineering team. They're working on something with business transformation. I'm sure that's the case, right? Always the same kind of conversation. Nobody's coming together as a group to own that. Automation was our catalyst to bring these groups together so we can transform for change. So as I was talking about the Fusion teams, we would include people from learning, obviously our PMO, so they could prioritize and allocate the funds appropriately, but most importantly, business and process engineering and IT. People that can help us re-engineer the process, but also understand the technology on how we can change. And then the operational partners around here. The most unique thing of bringing these Fusion teams together, aligning roadmaps across this, is now we started not to automate just vertically in that silo, but more horizontal. So now nurses that work in several different departments, from the point of care, let's say home care, to the nurse that's reviewing claims on the insurance side and the payer side, are now in a community of practice where they're exchanging those ideas and proud of what they discover and what they find and how they're solutionizing it. So now it's not, oh, I'm going to expand my network and talk. Now they have a common link where they're starting to discuss, oh, I guess I never realized that. You submit the claim, then it goes to 15 different steps before it comes to me to review it. Can we work with Jim from Process Improvement to help us re-engineer that process? And then Jim comes into the fold, and that process steps start being broken down. And in the meantime, they're building automations that structure that data, so when it starts from point A and gets to point C, that now we have a structured data field that we can then talk about further automations downstream. Hands down, the most important aspect of that was how I started seeing horizontal automations across the healthcare continuum when we brought these groups together around automation as a tool. Yesterday I mentioned Salesforce and Genesis. So as our organization started expanding, everybody has their roadmap, right, for the different systems and products. Automation, at least from my experience, is often in its own little space that we sometimes compete with core systems and changes that happen. This is a gradual change, so I wish I could say we were perfect at it, but that was our goal, is as we're bringing these groups of people together, and with this, Now we're starting to interact with product roadmaps. So we're not competing anymore, but we're complementing. We all have a common problem that we have to solve, like we talked at the beginning, right? So this is the key slide that we show from, again, from the top down, what's happening. So as we continue to bring that quantitative data forward, we start driving that forward. All right, so that's great, Joe. So how do we do it? Tell me. So I've talked about like how we find the opportunity and how we brand and implement and change the hearts and minds of the folks around us that have a common journey. Now I'm going to talk about more, once we kick that off and we start building our first automation, what does that look like? You know, everything sounds great on paper, right? But you know as well as I do, there's good in the bad and the ugly that we all probably will talk about at the bar later. But nonetheless, we started off with building trust. And this was always the key from the very beginning. Because I realized, as from my experience in healthcare, as well as through my friends, colleagues, and that if we didn't build that trust at the beginning, they quit listening before we were done, right? Another quote that somebody mentioned to me once. They're like, Joe, the patients don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care with that. This kind of layers into that same theme. So how do we build trust? Human in the loop, or human-centric design. So as we were teaching people how to build and automate bots, a lot of us are often perfectionists, and we're like, I don't want to touch it. I just want it to get done from these 3 steps, and let's move on. However, then we got to deal with any change management that occurs with that. If the bot's not working correctly, or it's doing the wrong thing, or what's happening, and I don't see it anymore. So we start off with an attended automation using Alley. And Alley provides the associates the ability to review the work before it moves on to the next bot or the next person as it goes through. So now they're doing their own quality check at first, saying, okay, I just want to send me the work, I'm going to look it up, fill these 2 boxes in, and then I want to go on to the next step because I don't trust Alley's doing it right yet. He's still a new hire. I don't believe he can do it. Then we switch over to a hybrid automation. And the unique thing was, I thought we would have to force this journey as we went through, but the associates themselves pathed this maturity pathway as they went through. I thought it would take months to get to the end, and I was like, we got a timeline. We have to push it forward. But what I found was, as we were going through that, and us as a team, was primarily that if we gave them the opportunity, they came up with the ideas. So like, you know what? I've been looking at Allie's work for 2 weeks now. I don't need to check that anymore. I don't need to be in the loop, but I still want to review it, you know, especially for the high-risk claims or the high-risk cases. So then we started moving into hybrid automation. So this is in the process where we have attended automation that then pushes it to an unattended bot to finish the work off, right? To my surprise, and I'm very proud to say it, 2 or 3 weeks later, they said, you know what? I don't need to look at this work anymore. You know, I've been clicking this next button for my last 6 months when I came into this job, and Allie's doing a great job. Don't need to check the work, just send it over. And then we can just have a kick-out queue in our system that if something goes wrong, then we'll push it over, right? So then that moved to a fully unattended solution. So my point is here, take the associates on their own journey. Let them gain the trust in the process. They will talk to their leaders about what they like and don't like. Keep a close eye on it. Help them through that. But if you give them the opportunity and the chance to innovate, they will. Let them have the opportunity. This is the next one. This was like, where do we get started? Like we have all these ideas, and like we like to do the cool stuff too. You know, like how do I digitize documents? How do I do this? Basically, how do I advance my portfolio from being 90% pure RPA and small complexity projects to 10% high complexity, and I make that shift a little bit. So I have a 70-30 split between low, medium complexity, and high complexity projects. As we went across departments, what we found is, and often kind of misled as we look at, like I want to look at the start to the end of the process traditionally, right? As we were looking through, as the work was being passed to our middle office, often exceptions type work, that gets through creation of accounts, deletion of addresses, adding of allergies and health conditions to the profiles, like these type of things that are very important. However, they're 5 to 10 steps, and they're repetitive steps with yes or no, very binary. We found that in our middle office. And by starting there in a small increment, we were able to build left and right of that process to add in complexity. So as we look forward, then we start diving into more like how do we take call transcripts in the front office and leverage speech analytics and an NLP to then help me decide in my call audits, like are they saying the right things that they should in that language? Or as a patient calls in and says, you need to reship me my medication. We're able to take those words out of there through speech transcription and then run an audit on the background of like, how did this happen? Do they have 2 addresses and they're in their New York home, but we send it to their Florida home, which is often the case as we move through. So we start layering in complexity from those small increments as we move forward. Intelligent automation in the back office. So this is as we're digitizing documents and things coming through. My point of this slide here, I could go on for this for days, and we could talk more about it. Start small. Innovation comes from small increments, and oftentimes we try to make it perfect and make very large projects be the transformational ones. If you start small, you can also grow on it as you layer in complexity, and you'll see the biggest gains as you move through that. Again, empowering your associates to help with those ideas as they expand their skill sets. All right, so I mentioned Citizen Developer earlier, and this was a big part of our program because we wanted the clinicians and the associates that were not technologists, they didn't go to school to be in IT, to start learning these skills and layer in the complexity of it. So we had a heavy focus on this, and we still do, and how we can enable them. As we started deploying our automation, these are the words that our associates were saying, and we still capture this. We still give them surveys, and we share this with each other as we move through it. And we also tell the other organizations, like this is the feedback on how Allie's doing this week, this month, this year. Allie has quality metrics and productivity metrics just like associates, for the record. We treat that no different. But the most inspiring thing here was to hear people that were at the first and the onset of when we started this journey were saying things like, you don't understand, you can't do it, I don't want it, and I don't trust it. Now words like, I like that I didn't have to worry anymore. And it was amazing seeing, when I was working in a retail pharmacy as an example, I'm like, did I put the right medication in the bottle? Like those were thoughts I would have at night. I know I did it correctly and somebody checked my work, but I would go home often with those thoughts, like did I do that right? Because if I didn't, then it would cause harm. And so that's what that comment related to me, and how I personally related to it. I'm like, wow, so we're letting people get free of mind now because Allie's checking their work, and they can leave with security. Next is, again, nice to I don't check the boxes, the simple automations, not worry. It saved me from making a mistake. It was a good experience. Reduced duplications, reduced repetitive questions, and I learned so much. That's what they were saying. This was a testament to the work that we did, the hours that we poured into it, and the team taking the time to understand the people that were involved in the process and what they needed and what they wanted, instead of from the top down only saying, this is what you're having, right? So lessons learned. Capture the right question. So oftentimes we start off the problem and we say, how do we fix this? And I have a journey map around this whiteboarded room here, right, with lines and circles and stars and all that on how I'm going to change the world. What we started outlining was we have 2 ideas within our project portfolio. We have bridge projects and we have transformational ones. Bridge projects are things that we know are problems today that have a life cycle that may be less than 6 months. But with RPA, things can happen much cheaper now and much faster. So I'm not spending $500,000 to get tasks automated anymore. I'm spending less than $100,000 to do it, probably more like 30. But, the transformational one is when they have a life cycle that's longer than 6 months or a year. So these are things we're going to spend more time on developing and designing. These are things that we know will have a life cycle that will supersede an immediate need, whether it's staff or whatever, right, as we move through. Next thing is design for trust. I've spent a lot of time talking about this today, but involve your SMEs from the beginning. They're the ones closest to the process. They talk to your members. They talk to your patients. Let them include the journey and teach them how to problem solve through this and design this automation. Their voice will help drive from the bottom up how to transform your organization and take on these new skill sets to reinvent their jobs, not only what they're doing inside their process steps today, but also their careers. It's not unusual for us now to have people that started off this process as SMEs and now they're running RPA portfolios for healthcare in our healthcare divisions or in our insurance segments. We're teaching new skills and teaching them how to apply their knowledge in different ways. Next one is design for end state as we move through. Again, like I was saying before, short-term bridge projects and long-term transformational ones. At your beginning, you shouldn't have 90% long-term transformational. That should be 10% of your problems that you need to solve. Keep it 90 at the first, 80, 90% being short or medium-sized projects. And also, don't be afraid to assign complexity to your projects when you do discovery. Make a grid. Low to medium-sized projects include, or low-sized complexity projects is anything from 1 to 10 steps. Interacts between 1 or 2 systems. Like, make that taxonomy so now we're keeping the same language as we move forward. Who would like to meet Allie? You guys like Allie? Okay, I think we have some Q&A now for our 11 minutes and 1 second. Yeah.
Hey, Joe, great presentation. So I had a quick question. In terms of, a lot of times we always have the experience of, hey, we built the bot, we got all the problems solved, we want you to test it. And we constantly get the notification of, we're still too busy. We have no way to do this. We're really busy. And we ask them, anytime, like, I'll give you like 20 minutes, and we just want to make sure it works. And they still tell us, no. So any suggestions, any recommendations, how do we make it easier so that they understand that this is going to help them and it speaks volumes in the future?
Yeah, just some context. So are you on the IT side and you're asking business to test?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. That's always a fun one. It starts off with, if they're not taking time to do it, then that means they don't see the value in it, maybe necessarily, or they haven't been involved and other priorities have taken over. So I would add that to like their leadership, like team meetings, or be involved in those leadership meetings, like so the supervisors can get direction to make this a priority as they move forward, right? It's about outlining the benefit of it, and also kind of goes back to that branding piece, right? They should be looking forward to Allie coming to help them with their job, not that IT's pushing another bot up on their shoulders, right? So I think part of it is being involved in the stakeholder communication, push downward to the supervisors and associates. Then it's also let your brand carry your progression with it. Yeah. And don't be afraid to include them in creating their own test plans and teaching them all the individual steps on that. The more they're involved, the more they'll take over.
Thanks. See how to phrase this. So in 2 spots in your presentation, I guess what I noticed the most was it was very people focused when it came to ROI. So you had a slide that said ROI, and there was a lot of, you know, hey, I didn't make mistakes, which is always hard to quantify. And then even in the slide where you talked about going from attended mode to unattended mode, you know, it was very much kind of ask the user. And so I guess what is the balance between, you know, probably on the executive side, between, I don't know, how do you get the executives to kind of go for that, right? Like, you know, how do you influence them to say, there's these qualitative parts when, you know, they've also got the budget?
Yes, that's a top-down conversation. Yeah, you know, I can say only so much on public slides like this, so that's why it's kind of vague, but I'll do my best to describe it. Well, honestly, it starts out with the portfolio, right? So we have a ton of ideas on the board, and as an example, and we have the ROIs outlined on them. So I'm probably always pushing a high ROI project to the top of that list, knowing that that's going to keep driving our funding going forward and keeping the lights on as we move, right? When we kicked off our initial pieces, and with that, it was more like, it was almost like a startup, you know, as how I went off and asked for that money. It was like, if you give me X millions of dollars, or on the lower end of that, right, and I'll give you X number in return, right, and my ROI will pay for itself, pay for this program within the first 6 months, is how I geared up that conversation. And then also we worked with HR on the people side on how this was going to reinvent and reskill our staff. We all, as a company, and I'm sure all of you go through this as well, like we understand we don't just have an automation problem, we have a data literacy problem as we look across the organization. We need to upskill our staff and associate to handle more complex things with new technology in the future. So we just jumped on that train with Power Automate and the other initiatives that were happening within our enterprise as well. And that people aspect is really what said, this is a no-brainer. We can get a 3X, 4X, whatever return on this, but that people side is the no-brainer. You're asking for a little bit to establish a team to create a culture that creates further data literacy in our organization. Hopefully that helps.
Hi, this is Madan.
Hi.
Just a quick question here. Now, automation, the leadership team is convinced to bring automation to the enterprise. They're all convinced that it's going to do wonders, and boom, here we go. When you come down to the ground, you need to take the SMEs into confidence, you know, the day-to-day operators into confidence, and trust me, they're not easy to crack because they have so many apprehensions. They're fearful of losing the job. So how do you take them into confidence, telling that, look, this is not going to take your jobs away. We're here to help you. So how do you have those conversations, and what are some of the things that we can use in our projects going forward? Yep.
This goes back to that message wheel that I was referring to before. Automatically, people will think my job is going away. That's what the media, you know, industry has trained people to think about automation over time. So like two parts to that. One, remember we talking about during the Art of the Possible sessions, we brought real life examples in history. We use a lot of healthcare as it would relate to more for me, and then the financial district would be also very different. But there's real life use cases that people in the room actually experienced, you know, 80s, 90s, et cetera, as they went through. Bring that to life so they can see, yeah, I remember going through that, and I had those feelings. But I also saw the transformation on how it improved the quality of the outcome at the end. And this is how we managed through it. Or this is how it didn't go well and how we need to change it now. That was the starting point. It layered into more of the FAQs, the message wheels, and I found if you give leaders that address their departments or teams the words to describe it and the template to use, they'll often use it and they'll describe it correctly. Right. I think that was the key differentiator for us. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any sense of what your competitors are doing with the RPA? Where you lie?
Not as good as us. I think across the healthcare industry as a whole, like we realize that we have years of redundancies built into processes just because of how the continuum has been set up for over, you know, for the last 50, 60 years or more, right? if we had disjointed and siloed components from the time you go step in the doctor's office to the time your insurance pays the bill. Right? I think that's no hidden secret. I don't know what my competitors are doing, but I do know like the opportunity inside the industry is around how do we take those repetitive steps and start normalizing that data set so we can do more with it, right? Whether it's integrations with Epic or name the big company, right? But it starts off with like usually simple emails and digitizing those documents that come in, so a person doesn't have to review it. And that would be where I see transformation is.
Just a quick follow-up to the last question. Were you doing all of that, like community engagement and education around automation prior to any implementation, or was it done like as part of the implementation package of those first processes?
Both. So as we went off and created our backlogs, like I had a team, right? And the team was really interacting with the associates from the bottom up, and then I was flying head cover over top, going around meeting with the executive teams on the different segments to bring awareness that this was coming and this is what their associates are doing to spawn ideas and create that transformation. At the higher level, in the starting off of the program as we kickstarted it, then each implementation had email templates that would get sent out, and it's like, Allie's being introduced into your area, this is the day he's starting, and it was a structured template that we would then layer in, the description of the process, the steps. Also, the training was well curated to be on point with brand, as well as with the messaging. So every training would start off, and Allie would, hey, I'm here to help you. If you have any other ideas, this is how you get a hold of me, blah, 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 right, as we go through. So it was a consistency through the messaging that we had.
So when you look to the future for Humana and process automation, what are the biggest challenges you see, and what are you doing in anticipation of those?
Oh. Challenges. Where do I start? I think more importantly, like the challenges come to like how do you introduce like task mining or like Fortress IQ or name the thing. Like how do I take that manual discovery session that we had and implement the further technologies just to speed up the opportunity discovery. And the reason I say that is because primarily what we found as we've been moving this program and scaling it across, we move faster than the pipeline comes in most cases. So we're often adjusting our velocity on what we can complete. So we're trying to get at a more stable place with that. I think the community of practice will definitely, as that picks up and takes off, I think they're having a watch party right now actually on it, that will start becoming more consistent over time and as we move through it. That will always be a challenge though, because as you reskill and teach people new things and new components, they're now going off and finding new jobs and careers that they didn't expect. So that's why keeping that community alive and thriving will be key to the continued growth and complexity of the automation program. One more question, it looks like. Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
So, first of all, I really appreciate Humana. I'm a consumer of your product from my parents. And the chatbot and all of that has just gotten better and better and better over the last 6 years. So thank you. To hear that. So it's nice to see the inside operations, how it's going. I am curious about Allie. So as an agent, I tell Allie what I need done, and then your team is behind the scenes developing the bot, or is Allie part of automation anywhere, or what is Allie about?
Yeah. First off, thanks for telling me your experience with the company. It's always great to hear, again, from the front line, like that we're doing things the right way and caring for people. The same question came up right before this as well. We have Allie, and that's how we internally branded our bot, like inside, or like the collection of bots, right? Ari, similar names, I know, was not planned as we went through this. Allie uses Automation Anywhere technology, primarily Ari, to execute the work, right? So Allie and Ari are technically the same person, if Ari's a person. Does that make sense? We just branded it that way internally. Not by design, it's just we did this before Ari came out, and we just didn't, we didn't have the product council up there on stage so I could tell them not to do it before, but yeah. But basically, it's doing automation steps. So basically, as an example, so Allie will review claims and identify like high-risk claims, and then pass it to the associate to fill out certain questions, and then pass it to another associate to validate on high-risk claims. Right? That's just one example. It's presenting work in a work queue, and then Allie will pop up and say, here are the fields that you need to fill out to complete the steps. Instead of putting it in an email or copying it into 4 systems, Allie does those steps for it. Or Ari. It could be the same.
So that's not part of the citizen development?
No, the citizen developers, like the clinicians on the ground, are helping design what that form looks like as it's presented. That was a very important step. We realized that we need people close to the work to discuss, that have been doing the works for decades or whatever, right? To tell and design how they structure the form so it doesn't completely disrupt their day-to-day, right? The easier touch that it is and the less friction, the more adoption that took over. And they could turn the changes around much quicker as they were doing it. All right, my time is up. Safe travels back home. Thanks, everybody.